She had always been comfortable with silence. While other children clamored for attention, for the newest toys, for the validation of their peers, Maya Alvarez found her peace in the heavy, oil-scented quiet of her grandfather's garage. It was a sanctuary of forgotten things, a place where the outside world's noise faded into the background hum of an old refrigerator. And in the center of this sanctuary, on a worn flannel blanket, lay the object that would come to define the contours of her soul. It wasn't much to look at. To the untrained eye, it was a piece of junk. The stock was a dark, scarred wood cross-hatched with 1,000 fine lines like the wrinkles on her grandfather's face. The metal receiver was a patchwork of gray and brown, a patina not of careful aging, but of hard use and neglect. The barrel, when she peered down it, was dark and seemed to swallow the light. Her grandfather, a man of few words and deep silences, had simply pulled it from a dusty duffel bag one afternoon and placed it on the blanket. "This was your great-uncle's," he'd said, his voice a low rumble like stones turning in a river. "Joaquin. He was a hunter in the old country in the mountains. He said this rifle never let him go hungry, and it never let him die. He'd shown her how to hold it, not like a toy, but like a tool. He taught her the weight of it, the balance, the way the cold steel became warm in your hands. She became an extension of your own body. He taught her to respect it, not with fear, but with an understanding of its purpose. It was a Model 70 Winchester, a pre-64 model, he'd explained, from a time when things were built to last. It was chambered in .30-06, a cartridge he called the Old Warhorse. It had a scope on it, an ancient, scratched piece of glass that her grandfather said was more reliable than anything with a battery. While her friends spent their weekends at the mall or glued to their phones, Maya was at the firing range, the heavy crack of the Winchester a stark contrast to the pop of the modern black rifles around her. She'd lie in the prone position for hours, learning to feel her own heartbeat and pull the trigger in the pause between beats. She learned to read the wind by the way the tall grass bent, and to judge distance with her eye, to become one with the rifle until the act of aiming was as natural as breathing. The rifle was her teacher. It demanded patience. It demanded stillness. It demanded that she quiet the frantic, chattering part of her mind and listen only to the whisper of the wind and the slow, steady rhythm of her own blood. In a world that was increasingly loud and fast, the old junk rifle taught her the power of being slow and quiet. It was in that garage, and with the smell of oil and old wood, that a little girl's unusual hobby began to forge the unbreakable steel of a warrior's spirit. It was the first silent lesson in a journey that would one day leave a jungle full of enemies in utter disbelief. The path from her grandfather's garage to the doorstep of the most exclusive fraternity on earth was not a straight line, but a jagged uphill climb. Maya carried the lessons of the Winchester with her. Now, but the world saw a 5'4" woman with a quiet demeanor. They saw the surface, not the depth. She excelled in every sport that demanded endurance and focus: cross-country running, archery, competitive shooting. She graduated top of her class and could have taken a comfortable path, but comfort was not a language her soul understood. She enlisted. The decision baffled her high school counselors and worried her mother, but her grandfather simply nodded. There was a flicker of something profound and unreadable in his old eyes. The regular army was a shock. She was strong, but she had to get stronger. She was focused, but she had to learn to focus through exhaustion, through pain, through the screaming of her muscles. She did well, earning respect through sheer stubborn competence, but she was always watching, always listening. She heard whispers of a place called Coronado, of a training so brutal it broke the strongest men. They called it BUD/S, a basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. It was the gateway to the teams. The desire crystallized in her like frost on a winter morning. It was a quiet, cold, and absolute certainty. She wanted to be a SEAL, not for glory, not to prove a point, but because it was the hardest thing she could imagine. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "The mountain doesn't care if you're tired, mija. You either climb or you come back down." The application process was a gauntlet of its own. She was met with skepticism, with poorly disguised smirks, with the outright laughter of officers who thought she was wasting their time. "A female SEAL?" they'd chuckle. "Stick to nursing, sweetheart." She submitted the paperwork anyway, again and again, a quiet avalanche of determination. She scored in the highest percentile on the physical screening test, her run times and swim times beating the male averages. Still, the door remained heavy, the resistance palpable. It was a battle fought with paper and policy, and it was just as exhausting as any physical ordeal. Finally, the door cracked open. The military was slowly, begrudgingly opening certain combat roles to women. She was given a chance. She was one of a handful of women to ever set foot on the grinder, the infamous black asphalt parade field of the Naval Special Warfare Center, surrounded by a sea of men who were, to put it mildly, not happy to see her. Hell Week was the crucible. 5.5 days of constant, agonizing physical and mental torment. Sleep deprivation, hypothermia, log PT, boat races in the freezing Pacific surf. Her body screamed for mercy. Her mind, however, was back in that quiet garage. She focused on the rifle, on the patience it required, on the stillness. While others broke down, sobbing from the cold and exhaustion, she retreated into that internal quiet. The instructors, the men they called the Sharks, hounded her, singled her out, or trying to get her to quit. They'd scream inches from her face, calling her a waste of air, a distraction. She'd just stare back, her dark eyes calm, unfocused, looking through them. She was not there. She was on a firing line waiting for the perfect shot. On the final night, shivering uncontrollably, her hands raw and bleeding, her team was failing. They were falling behind on a timed evolution, their morale shattered. They saw her, the woman they had initially ignored or resented, as the weak link. But she started moving. She coordinated their efforts, her voice quiet but impossibly firm, cutting through the wind and the shouts. She took the heaviest part of the load, her small frame somehow finding reserves of strength the others had lost. They watched her, this quiet anomaly, refuse to sink. And in that moment of shared, absolute misery, something shifted. They saw her not as a woman, but as a teammate, as someone who was willing to suffer just as much, if not more, than they were for the same goal. When the long, agonizing week ended and she stood on the grinder, still standing, the hard-earned respect in the eyes of the men around her was worth more than any medal. The girl from the garage had become a Navy SEAL. The team, Platoon 7 of SEAL Team 4, was a brotherhood forged not from shared history, but from shared suffering. They were a mix of seasoned operators and newer guys, and they had grudgingly accepted Maya as one of their own. But acceptance and full understanding are two different things. Her methods were odd. She was quiet, almost unnervingly so. While the others traded barbs and stories in the hangar before a deployment, she would be off to the side, meticulously cleaning a rifle that looked like an antique. Senior Chief John Mac McAllister, a 20-year veteran with a salt and pepper beard and eyes the color of a winter sky, watched her one day as she worked on the Winchester. "You know we have brand new MK-12S in the armory, Alvarez," he said, not unkindly. "State-of-the-art. Optics that can give you the range, wind, and angle with the push of a button. That thing," he gestured with his chin towards the rifle, "is a museum piece." Maya looked up from her work, her expression placid. "It shoots where I point it, Senior Chief. So does the MK-12. A lot faster, a lot flatter. It doesn't jam," she said simply, her voice carrying a finality that ended the conversation. Mac just shook his head and walked away. He'd seen a lot of quirks in his time, a lot of good luck charms and strange rituals. A vintage rifle was a new one, but if it helped her stay calm when the rounds started flying, he wasn't going to stop her. Their deployment was to the dense, triple-canopy jungles of the Philippines, hunting a high-value target on a terrorist leader known as the Spider, who had built a network of camps in the most inaccessible terrain. It was a sniper's nightmare. The jungle was a world of perpetual twilight, thick with humidity, sound, and a million places for an enemy to hide. The platoon's two primary snipers, operators named Kowalski and Jameson, were masters of their craft with their high-tech sniper systems. But the jungle frustrated them. The dense foliage deflected their advanced rangefinders. Now, the humidity played havoc with their ballistic calculations. Shots that were routine in the desert became impossible gambles here. The platoon was moving up a narrow, muddy riverbed, the jungle pressing in on them from all sides. They were deep in Spider territory, and the silence was heavy, watchful. Then, the first shot rang out. It wasn't the sharp crack of a high-velocity rifle, but a deeper, heavier thump that echoed off the canyon walls. Jonesy, the point man, went down with a scream, to a round tearing through his thigh. The platoon erupted into action, diving for cover behind rocks and fallen logs. They were in a kill box. The shots kept coming, each one from a different direction, high in the canopy. They couldn't see the muzzle flashes. They couldn't hear the report until after the bullet had passed. They were being hunted by ghost snipers, invisible in the green hell around them. Kowalski, trying to get a bead with his thermal scope, just shook his head in frustration. "Not too much canopy. The heat signature is diffused. I can't get a fix." Another shot whined off a rock near Mac's head, spraying him with stone chips. "They're using old Russian-supplied Dragunovs," Jameson yelled, his face pressed into the mud. "The report is bouncing all over this canyon. I can't tell where it's coming from." Panic was a physical presence in the air. They were pinned down, one man bleeding out, and a team of expert shooters was systematically taking them apart. And they couldn't move. They couldn't fight back. They could only wait to die. It was a masterclass in ambush, and it was working. Then, a quiet voice cut through the chaos. "I see them." It was Maya. She had wedged herself between two moss-covered boulders. She wasn't looking through a high-tech scope. She wasn't fiddling with a tablet. Her eye was pressed to the old, scratched glass of the Winchester. Her breathing was so slow and deep it was almost imperceptible. Mac stared at her, incredulous. "You see them? With that junk? Alvarez, we're sitting ducks. Get down." But she didn't move. Her entire world had narrowed to a tiny circle of magnified light. She wasn't looking for a man. She was looking for the slightest anomaly in the pattern of the jungle. A leaf that didn't quite move with the wind. A patch of shadow that was just a little too dark. A glint, not of light, but of the absence of light, where the sun didn't hit. She had been trained on this. As her grandfather's lessons weren't about ballistics tables. They were about seeing. "The animal is part of the mountain," he used to say. "To see him, you don't look at the mountain. You look for where the mountain is wrong." The jungle wasn't a confusing mess of green. It was a pattern. And she was looking for the flaw in the pattern. The junk rifle, with its simple clear glass, showed her the jungle as it was. No filters, no digital enhancement, just light and shadow. She found him, a sniper, expertly camouflaged in a crook of a massive tree, 200 meters up the canyon wall. He was a smudge, a lump, but he was a lump that hadn't been there a minute ago. She tracked him, waiting. He was patient, but she was more patient. Finally, he shifted his weight, just a fraction of an inch, to line up another shot on her team. In that moment of movement, the illusion shattered. Her finger, already resting on the trigger, took up the slack. The old